Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Code and Pixels podcast. My name is Adekunle. I'm joined by Kelly. How are you doing today?
Hey, it's good. How's it going with you?
It's pretty good. It's a bright and sunny day in New York. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about tooling and productivity hacks and just talking in the context of design engineering, but also design systems and whatnot. And we're going to break it down between both design and developer tools so that we can get a mix of both things. So the first thing we want to tackle is around developer tools. And I could start off with a lot of hacky tools I've created in the past. So the first tooling I want to talk about is more in case of building design system components. As we all know, a lot of times when you're building these like components, it come with a bunch of things like components like the JS file. We have like usually MDX, which is mostly for documentation. We have a test for when you're writing tests and overall. What I've done in the past is like I created like a CLI script that kind of bootstraps all this stuff for you, so you don't have to like start from scratch every time you're building a design system component. Because I've done in the past where okay, I think I'm done, and I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot that there's no test file or there's no storybook file, whatnot. This is super handy when you're working on larger teams because again, you want to make sure things are consistent. And additionally, we have a case where if you want other people from outside the design system to contribute, this actually makes it easy for them to do. So that is my first productivity hack.
Yeah, we have something similar over when we're working on design system stuff. We have something we open source called Design Systems CLI, and it has a bunch of what you talked about. It has all the tests and you can scaffold components and whatnot. But one of my favorite things about it is it has Storybook as part of the process. And I just like building out the docs when I'm building out a component and having something like Storybook or having your docs right there. I find it super helpful. So it's a win in my book.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I have a similar process where let's start in the beginning where like I used to build components and then I always forget to write the documentation. I'm like, you know what? I write the documentation later. And that never happened because it was like someone was like, I'm trying to use the component, but there's no guidance or whatever like that. And I was like, crap. So I've been doing this like documentation driven component
Mhm.
workflow where I work with the designer and then we write all the documentation out. I write all the tests and documentation for like props in the beginning before I even touch code. And then when I start building, I just literally have to plug and play them. And that actually was super helpful because ever since I've done that, I haven't forgotten to write any documentation. Well, that's a win-win, right?
I think what's interesting for our team is with Storybook, there's so many different ways to organize information. And so in the beginning, we just had a 9,000 word essay on how to use this component. And we had to refrain from just typing everything that was in our brains about how to use a button because how many different ways can you use a button. So we ended up separating out different types of users and how they use components. And we found that to be super helpful. So we have a section that's just about, so you want to just use this component, cool. And then we have a separate section that's around, all right, now that you've got it installed, here are the different ways you can customize that component. And that kind of helped frame the context for what people are trying to do with this component. And then the third one, the third category is so you've installed the component, you've customized it a little bit, and you found a use case that the component doesn't cover. You want to contribute back. So that section has an introduction to things like design tokens and other things that a regular consumer might not care about. And it's also a great educational opportunity, and people get to see like the guts of what goes into contributing to a design system. So I found that's worked pretty well for us because it gives enough information without really overwhelming folks.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've learned in the past that people don't really like to read documentation if it looks like an essay. I always, anytime I see a large block of text, I ask the designers, "Hey, is there a way we can show this rather than tell people?" Because again, people don't read, and I fall in that same boat when I'm like, I just want to know like what I need to do, and if I see essay, I'm just gonna be like, I think I'll figure it out. But yeah, I love that point you made. So another story I want to tell about is revolves around prototyping. So for those who know me, I'm a big prototyping junkie. I feel in my life I spent probably that's the whole reason why I actually got into design systems, because I wanted to prototype screens real quickly, and I was still having questions about, oh, is this the right button? And I'm like, okay, there has to be a better way to do this. So I jumped into doing design systems. But I worked in the past where we have like a prototyping framework. If I had like an idea and I want to be able to prototype it, or maybe I want to work with someone else to help me prototype an idea and also show them. Doing it in code was super helpful. Actually, at Mailchimp, one of the engineers built out a tool called Bench, and it was basically a way where you go into CLI, you'd be like, all right, Bench, create, and then it'll create like a new instance of the application, but it's like bare, so you can bring in like the navigation, and the design system components are actually built in to the prototyping tool. You're ready to go. So all you have to do is start creating screens, and you can also make it available to the public with some sort of like CLI command. So yeah, it was pretty awesome because that was like the dream prototyping tool that I always wanted. It was super helpful, but also it also made it where designers were able to quickly prototype screens, because now like you don't have to go into the code base, you could do it outside of it, which I think is super helpful, but also makes it more approachable for designers that just want to get their feet wet, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, that's super cool. I love meeting people where they're at. Speaking of which, we've invested time working on tooling inside the editor as well. So we have a few VS Code extensions that really help us speed up our productivity. One of the ones I like to use is the accessibility snippets plugin that we've open sourced. And a shout out to Kendall who made this one. This one's pretty cool. So if let's say you're in the editor. So what this does is it searches for what you're typing, and it'll suggest, or it'll autocomplete the right CSS. So it's a pretty cool plugin. We have a few others that we've open sourced, but that one's one of my favorites because with accessibility, it takes the effort into remembering everything and just auto generates.
oh, that's actually pretty dope.
So it does reduced motion, etc. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was always a dream for me to be able to build a VS Code extension. One of the things I wanted to do was like, you know how you have the design tokens, and sometimes you forget like the name of the design token, so you have to go back into the documentation. I was doing that all the time. I was like, oh, I want to like create a VS Code like extension, and when I was doing research, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty hard to do, and I forgot about it, and I never did it. But this tool you're talking about, you said it's open source, right? Is it?
It is open source.
Oh, so maybe I could just like
Accessibility dash snippets. You can check it out.
we'll definitely put it into the notes so people can check it out. But I'm definitely gonna check it out because I'm lazy and I like to just take other people's stuff. But cool, yeah. So those are like some of the developer tools and whatnot. Let's jump into more design tools, and I'll start off. It's probably gonna be more Figma focused. So if you're using like Sketch or anything else, I can help you because it's been a while. But Figma's the thing. But one Figma tool that was pretty cool that one of my colleagues created when I was in Mailchimp was that we were facing an issue where designers were like building in Figma, and they were like, oh, I want to know what's the proper guidance for building a button, or maybe a modal or whatever like that. So they had to go out of Figma and go into the documentation website, and they read and whatever like that. And it was getting to the point where a lot of the designers was like, oh no, like that documentation site is just for engineers and whatnot. So we wanted to meet them at Figma. So a couple of my colleagues created a extension where if you right click on any design system component, there will be like some sort of link to see the documentation inside Figma, and it's all coming from the documentation website. So you don't have to like do any context switching when you're like building out UI. That was super great because now one idea that was floated by was that like, oh, we should like recreate the documentation in Figma, and I was like, that would be a nightmare because that means you'll have to maintain documentation in two places. But yeah, that was like something that's super simple, but was super valuable to a lot of designers because they're like, oh, I could just stay in Figma all day, which I feel like that's what most designers want to do. So, yeah.
Did the developers use it too?
Not really, because like most of the developers aren't in Figma that much unless they're like collaborating with the designer, because sometimes they'll have questions about specific UI and whatnot. And from the standpoint of the engineers or developers, they prefer actually going to the site because if they want to like copy code snippets, which we had, they'll just do it over there, or they can see the different variations. And I think that was the one thing that was lacking with this tool. It was just showing the design guidelines and not anything else.
It's funny because when I see a design that's changed, I can spot the difference in 2 seconds. I can just laser in on, oh, that's different. I think it was growing up as a kid reading highlights magazines. It's like spot the differences between these two images. And I've realized over time that not everyone is like that. And so when we have handoffs or when we have things that change in designs, not everyone quickly can see what's changed. So I found using Annotate Kit really helpful as a Figma plugin and highlighting if something's either changed, been added, or removed, or if it's like a content change or a color change, and specifying that has made it a lot more easy for other folks to quickly identify what they need to do to update things. And so I love any kind of plugin or tooling that helps folks get like a snapshot view of things they need to pay attention to because there's just so much to look at depending on what you're working on.
That sounds like an amazing tool. I still remember back in the days when I used to do annotation by hand, and that was the most painful thing I ever did. Like literally, I was like, "Hey, this is the one design, and this what happens when it comes up to this design. This is what changes." And I was like, "There has to be a better way of doing this." And again, I was doing it by hand, but this tool that you mentioned sounds pretty amazing because I'm assuming that all the stuff is automated, so you don't have to say that stuff. It will show the diff. Is that correct?
I don't know about automation, but I know it has a lot of good styles to like quickly identify what you're doing. So one of the first things is what exactly is changing and having that kind of consistency when you're annotating makes it really easy. So like color coding and like just the formatting makes it really easy to parse.
Oh wow, yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out. One more Figma plugin. Again, this was actually another colleague from Mailchimp. He created was that we had a lot of like stock photos and illustrations that were specifically for the application. And what happens like people will either go into Google Drive or they'll go into what was the other thing? Just like random stuff in their like desktop to be able to drop in like these like stock photos or whatever like that. So just he just made like a one-stop shop for the illustrations and photos. So it was in actual a plugin. So you could be designing blah blah blah. I'm like, all right, I want this specific illustration, and then they could just use the plugin to be able to like bring that in. Again, they don't have to like do any like context switching. It's a simple tool, but if you think about how much time it saves from like you having to like, all right, find this photo and bring it in and whatever like that, um, that will save a bunch of time and also it'll make it easy for, let's say, if you want to add another illustration, you add it in one place and then basically everyone gets it. So that's like another small Figma plugin that was I didn't use it personally, but I just know that a lot of people were like excited about it because it made their lives easier. So
That's always a good sign. It made my life easier. Try. And so I don't want to make it worse, but that could be an interesting story of a time when you made something that made someone's workflow worse.
I've seen it before. I don't want to name them names, but
You made a mistake. The plugin story. So I know we've talked a bit about Figma plugins, but beyond Figma, I know our teams have worked on things like Chrome extensions and like browser extensions. And one of my favorite ones that I like to talk about, we have one where when you open a new tab, it actually has a bunch of quick links to design system resources. And that one was really nice because people, you have so many bookmarks and everyone organizes them differently. And it was really hard to make sure that everyone had the right bookmarks, even if you give them bookmarklets. Like, there's no guarantee that they're going to look at it or remember where things live in that giant list of resources. So, having a consistent layout and things that we can like prioritize in a plugin that everyone creates a new tab. So just having that there, that's consistent, that's in your face. Hey, make sure you're looking at the design system when designing, was a really cool thing that I think not I haven't really seen that with other systems. And I thought it was cool that it's outside of Figma. We're so used to having everything inside of our design tooling. So something design tooling adjacent in something like your browser, I thought was a really cool idea.
yeah, I think that's cool because when you think about it, like Chrome extensions is like accessible for everyone, versus like Figma is like specifically for designers. So I think uh, that's always a good idea. And I think about it, I had the same thing where I was like, I have to create my own like uh, design system folder because it will be like linked to the storybook, linked to Figma, linked to the Confluence page for the design system, and it's all this other stuff. And I'm thinking about it, oh, you probably create like a nice tool on it, and then if you want to make updates, you make updates to the actual extension, and everyone gets it. Um, this actually reminds me of another tool where sometimes there'll be like a war room where like you can't merge any changes and whatnot. So you're working like on a PR and you're like, oh, I can't merge this because there's something happening. An engineer created a extension that will allow you to show you the status of like the war room in your PR. So you might be like, oh, I'm ready to create the PR, and there's like this banner in the bottom that shows like, oh, everything's good, or oh, everything's blowing up. Please do not try to merge any changes and whatnot. So that was like another tool that was really helpful because again, I was like, why is this? Why can I not merge this? And I go into the war room and things are blowing up and whatnot. But yeah, that's like another cool Chrome extension.
Try not to break a release. Like, stop merging things. I'm trying to get this release out the door.
Yeah, that's I guess that'll be another topic, but I know that's a big thing, especially for folks that have work in design systems that's inside the product, like in the monolith. There's so many things you have to be aware of because you change one thing and then it literally can take down the whole application.
This is why you never merge a PR and you never break anything.
That's so true. I mean, sometimes you just gotta like not do anything in order for nothing to happen, basically, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's someone else's responsibility to merge it. You just write the code. Someone else can merge it.
And that actually reminds me of a story where I was like I did a PR and I was like, oh, I forgot to write tests. You know what? I don't need any tests. And it works when I'm using it. And then someone else tried to use it. It worked for a certain extent and then it broke. And I was like, wait, why did it break? And I was like, oh, okay, because I didn't test for those specific cases or not. So, moral of the story, always write tests for any component. I know that's hot drama, but I have a lot of experience with that kind of stuff.
A lot of experience not writing tests to make you write tests.
Exactly. Sometimes you have to write tests for the test you wrote.
Yeah, test for your tests.
And I guess the last one we want to talk about is probably my favorite is websites. For building quick websites. I was actually a big fan of Gatsby a couple years back for building design system documentation and whatnot. But then again, like one time I tried to upgrade and all these plugins started to break and I was like, oh god, I gotta change. So I actually went to Next. And Next is pretty good. You could do everything from building design system documentation. There's also a way to build APIs if you wanted to. So it's like a full stack framework, which I don't think there's a lot of them out there. But yeah, that's probably like my favorite site right now. So if next you want to sponsor this podcast, we're open to it. But Kelly, what's your thoughts on static site generator?
Yeah, I started with Gatsby and I had a site spun up in no time. Like I had a whole working site, nav, several pages, all within a few hours. I was very impressed, and the documentation was also pretty good, and it's gotten way better since I first started using it. And what I really liked about it was everything had a home. It's, oh, you want to do this thing. Oh, you put that in this file. Oh, you want to do that. Put that in this file. And I like the clarity. The one thing I really struggled with was not knowing GraphQL at the time, and all I wanted to do was to put an Instagram feed on a page, and just having to figure out what is going on and what having to like figure out all where the braces go, and understanding how all of that worked was a little stressful, but once I got it working, it was amazing. It was just the initial figuring out what was happening. What even I didn't know what GraphQL was when I was learning this. So that also probably contributed to being feeling lost. That being said, I have transitioned over to Next, and what I found to be my experience was I felt I was thrown into the deep end of the pool. I was like, oh wait, I have to make my own logic here. And ultimately, I found the most flexibility with Next. Like, I could do whatever I wanted. I was not constrained by anything, but I also felt like there were not as many docs as Gatsby, and I just had to figure it out by brute force and hoping a combination of letters that I'm typing on my keyboard made things work.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned. Yeah, the Gatsby docs were like probably like top notch. And I also remember you mentioned GraphQL. I think my when I first started with the Gatsby, like 80% was just understanding what the hell GraphQL was, because I thought it looks like JSON. I was like, oh, it's like JSON, and then it has JSON, and you could do filtering things, and I'm like, wait, oh, so it's not JSON, and then you just like there's like nodes and edges, and I was like, okay, wait, what is it? No, like, why does it have to do with anything? And it was just like there's a lot going on, but because of that, and I feel like a lot of people that weren't familiar with GraphQL are grateful that with Gatsby it shows you like how to consume them, because even for me I was like, okay, like, all right, I could consume these GraphQL APIs, how can I build it? And I had some context of like how to use them based off of like building Gatsby sites. So I think that's one thing I'm grateful of, and I agree with the whole next thing, because I was like, there was something I was trying to do, and I was like, there has to be a way to do it in Next easily, and I just was trying different like solutions, and I think it was like with like authentication, like I was trying to do like something with that, and I was like, and there wasn't like documentation for it, so I did it. I don't know if it's the right way of doing it, and but it works. That's a great thing. But I think with the Gatsby, they actually have like plugins for everything. So they have, I think they have a JSON Web Token plugin, but they made it easy where you just install the plugin, put it into the config, and then just write some code, and it's like it usually works.
Hmm.
But that was like the great thing about, again, Gatsby's cool too. So Gatsby, if you want to sponsor
Yeah.
too, you could just.
It depends on what you're trying to build. If you want to spin up something that you don't overly want to customize and just it's just there, I found Gatsby to be it just comes with so much already built in that you don't have to really mess with it too much.
Mhm. I was gonna say, I remember they have a bunch of like starter kits that people can use too, which was pretty cool. Because if someone was like, "Oh, I need a portfolio site," and it's like, "Oh, there's a starter kit for that," and I was like, "Oh, I probably shouldn't use that when I was building my website." But
How was setting up our website with Tailwind and Next? You want to talk about that?
yeah, it was actually pretty straightforward. Tailwind has some amazing docs, so I just like followed directions, and I was like, "Oh, that was it." I was like, it seemed too good to be true, but it actually worked pretty well together. Big Tailwind right now. I could just set up like the variables and whatever, and Next handle it pretty good too. And also, when you're building your own tokens or classes or like that, there's IntelliSense built in. So like I could be typing in, oh, I want the background red and 500, and it'll have all that built in. So I don't have to go back into the config file. But yeah, the website's built with Next.js and Tailwind, and yeah, it was super awesome. It was super easy to get it up and running. I'm not gonna lie, I was hesitant with Tailwind, but now I am a big fan. So
Yeah, I especially like how both Next and Gatsby you can supply your like MDX, or like you can customize the how you want your content to flow into them. And so one of the tools that I really like when if you're using MDX is Tina CMS, which is not a CMS, but I like having that kind of UI to edit MDX content as I'm building out the site. So I think tools like that are super cool because it's no longer hidden behind an MDX file somewhere else. You're editing it directly while working on the site.
oh cool, yeah, I have to try that because I like MDX, but I know it's hard for people that are not used to it. I was always wondering if there's like a tool for that. One tool I used was like Contentful. It's a cool tool. It takes a lot to set up. Let me just say that. But I think that's when you start to realize, like, all right, I needed some sort of. If you need like a content management system, and sometimes, oh, I could use WordPress or Contentful is probably better because it supports API requests. You can build on top of like a GraphQL. So let's say you write some content from your website, you can query that content with GraphQL, which I was like, oh, this is pretty nice. But yeah, I think Tina, I have to look that up because that sounds
Mhm.
like an awesome tool.
And I've been tinkering around with it. It's just really nice to have that kind of feedback, that real-time feedback when you're working. Just something that we need more of, I think. So I know we talked about we've gotten pretty technical with spinning up our own sites and having to rely on code to for documentation, but I want to go over some no-code solutions that I think are really helpful for teams where maybe you don't have as many technical folks on hand and you just want to get something up and running that can help your teams be on the same page. So the first one I wanted to talk about is Zero Height. I think Zero Height is fantastic for design system documentation or just documentation in general, but it has a lot of drag and drop functionality that I think makes it easy for folks to organize all of their content, and it has some nice built-ins and embed functionality, especially between Storybook and Figma, that makes it really easy to maintain without having to worry about the engineering that goes behind it.
It's funny you mentioned it. Like, I never used Zero Hype before, but I've heard good things about it, and I've heard it is like awesome for. I know like brand designers sometimes use it if they need to like document stuff. But yeah, I think that no code solution is definitely great, especially if you don't have any engineering resources. I've been there before where I was like, all right, I need a design system website. Do we have any engineers? Oh no, we have no engineers. Okay, I guess we'll just have to figure out something. Yeah, Zero Height. Definitely have to check that out. What would you say it's can you use Zero Height within if I have something Zero Height and I want to bring into like my Gatsby or Next documentation, is it possible to share data between those two or no?
That I'm not sure. I'm sure there's some export functionality, but I haven't really dove into that. But hey, maybe if Zero Height sponsors this podcast, we'll go more into it in another episode.
We need to rename this episode to Tooling and Sponsors.
Yes. Yeah.
I haven't used any no code solutions, but that's something I probably would have to learn about, especially if I'm working with like freelance clients and they're like, oh, I don't have money to like spend on this beautiful documentation. And they're like, oh, you don't need to because there's tools, Zero Height or like Gitbooks.
Gitbooks is nice. I like that. It's also pretty straightforward. I haven't really messed too much with it, but it seemed pretty promising from when I looked a while back.
Cool, but I think
But
that is all we have. So we talked about dev tools, we talked about design tools, we talked about websites and content management systems. So there's a lot of tooling that goes into this realm of design systems, design engineering. But yeah, this was a great chat. I feel like I haven't used most of these tools, but now you introduced me to a bunch of them, and I could go check them out and have my mind blown about, oh, this is so easy. Why I'm not using this?
I mean, I'm all for less work, so that's the name of the game. Less effort, more work, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, less effort, more work. Yeah, because I don't want to throw lazy in there because when if you say you're lazy, that might have a negative
Hmm.
look. But
Hmm.
yeah,
We'll come up with the tagline.
but yeah, it was great. Thanks for listening, Kelly. It's been a pleasure again.
Yep.
And yeah, for anything links related, we'll attach it to the show notes. And yeah, have a good rest of your day.